Number one overall pick, Caleb Williams. I actually heard some conversations about how he's going to be in the best situation that a number one overall pick has ever been in. So I thought to myself, man, maybe that is true or maybe it's not. I got to do some research on this, try to figure out if that is indeed the case. So he's going to be, or at least he was, the 28th quarterback drafted number one overall in the Super Bowl era. So that's the 66 to now. He's the 28th. So we look at those 28 quarterbacks drafted number one overall. Look at their particular situation. Now, I will say this: the Bears were a 7-10 team that ended up getting number one overall pick because of the trade with Carolina. So we look at of the 28 quarterbacks drafted number one overall, 22 of them went to a team coming off a season where it won no more than 25% of its games. So, like, talking about 4-12 record, something like that or worse. And Tim Couch, David Carr, and were drafted by two expansion teams, so they had no history there. The Browns, remember, they returned to the league in 1999. The Texans became the 32nd pick in 2002. So that leaves just three quarterbacks, other than Caleb Williams, of course, that joined a team that actually won at least 40% of its games the prior year. Jeff George, number one overall quarterback. He joined a 500 team in 1990 when the Colts traded up after their 8-8 season to land Jeff George. But he never lived up to expectations and ended up trading him. Yeah. And to Atlanta in 1994, where he played better. Also, 79 Rams, remember, this was recently, aggressively traded up to the number one pick in 2016 to draft Jared Goff. So that a 79 team and one Sean McVay obviously got there. They ended up going to a Super Bowl, trade him to Detroit. We know how that worked out. And then you have the examples in the last 2 years with Bryce Young and Caleb Williams, and they're coming off 7-10 teams, and they're having the number one overall pick. Remember, the Panthers just really wanted Bryce Young, so they made that trade with the Bears, and then the Bears ended up getting the number one overall pick this past season, even though they were a 7-10 team, but because of that trade with Carolina. So if you go look at the teams that drafted Jeff George, Goff, and drafted Bryce Young, all produce a worse record in their rookie year. So going 7-10 wasn't necessarily a great, predictor of what they were going to do once they became, the starting quarterback for those teams. So just from the record alone, you don't see a lot of teams that are 7-win teams that have drafted number one overall. Just from that standpoint, the Bears are a decent situation for a rookie quarterback. The Bears also ranked 20th in points allowed in 2023, which is also pretty good, considering this is a team that's going to end up, getting the number one overall pick. If you go look at it, there are a few teams that had basically defenses ranked in the top 15 or top 20 that also win draft number one overall quarterbacks. Jeff George is in that conversation. His defense was 11th. Jared Goff's Rams defense, that was also a defense that I think was 13th. And Bryce Young, the Panthers were 20. They're 19th. So those were top 20 defenses too. But most of the quarterbacks went to defenses that were at the bottom, right? They were just bad defenses in probably the lower half, if not a little quarter of defensive ranks in the season. We're talking about points allowed here. We're talking about scoring defense. And it was worth noting that they're basically, you'll look at it, there have been, and I'll give you this factoid. This will kind of give you the not ceiling, but it should give you a great kind of context and perspective on these quarterbacks. The only number one overall quarterback to win more than 7 starts as a rookie was Andrew Luck. So that's kind of a bar right there. Talking about the number one overall pick, right?
Yeah.
So the only number one overall pick to win more than 7 starts as a rookie was Andrew Luck. So that's, if you're looking at where Caleb Williams, if he's going to be considered a elite rookie quarterback in terms of the number one overall draft pick, that is kind of the barometer. And if you go also look at teams that, and I'll say, sorry, John Elway had a top 10 scoring defense with a number 9 ranking in Denver. Drew Bledsoe also, he had a really good defense, drafted number 1 overall. I think they were 11th. Sam Bradford, when he was drafted, they had a really good defense. The Rams did. Terry Bradshaw, in Pittsburgh. Eli Manning are the only ones that would they finished higher than a 20th ranking. So those are so in terms of the defense, I don't know if he's coming into a situation where his defense is considered that great. There have been number one overall picks who have been in much better situations defensively, but I will say his defense is better than 70% of the quarterbacks who were drafted number one overall. The assumption is the Bears defense will get better because they did make some investments on the defensive side of the ball. So that is the belief, is that Jalen Johnson, they re-signed the corner. They extended Montez Sweat. So the belief is the defense will be better, but they're still not necessarily one of the elite defenses in the NFL. And there have been number one overall quarterbacks who went to elite defenses.
Yeah.
Coaching, also, I don't think he's got a great coaching staff around him necessarily, or at least they haven't proven to be the case. Those 28 quarterbacks I talk about that were drafted number one overall, I mean, you're talking about coaches like Chuck Noll and Bill Parcells and Jimmy Johnson, Tom Coughlin's in that group of coaches drafted a quarterback number one overall. Those are Hall of Fame coaches. So Matt Eberflus doesn't necessarily measure up. So I think that's the biggest detriment to Caleb Williams' development, is that I'm not a huge Matt Eberflus fan, and I'm not really sure if Matt Eberflus is going to be the guy going forward that's going to help Caleb Williams reach his ceiling as a player.
Yeah, and Shane Waldron is your OC, who comes from Seattle, which is fine. He made Geno Smith a good quarterback, but it's not like he made Geno Smith a great quarterback. He's not like he's made great players. So, and how much of that is Pete Carroll? How much of it was Shane Waldron?
There's that how much that was Dave Canales? Remember, Dave Canales was there 2 seasons ago.
That's true.
And then went to Tampa,
and now he's head coach. Yeah.
And resurrected. Yeah. So I wonder how much of that was him. He resurrected Baker's career as well as Geno Smith's career. So I don't know if Caleb Williams is in a great situation for the coaching staff around him. And I'm not really sure about the O-line either. As the offensive line, I don't necessarily, I mean, he doesn't have any, there's no Pro Bowlers on that O-line or all pros on the Bears O-line. And there have been number one overall draft picks that have gone to teams with Pro Bowlers on their O-line and with all pro players on their O-line. Now these are career metrics, so then you got to go into, well, did they have the Pro Bowls and all pros before or after the number one overall pick got there? Not going that deep into it. I'm just talking about guys who have that kind of ceiling that were on that O-line they end up playing with. And right now he doesn't have anybody, but like I said, that could all change. Once he gets there, he could be really the catalyst for everybody getting better. Matt Eberflus might become an elite coach. The O-line might be getting better. That's what great players do. They uplift the talent of everybody around them. Remember, until Andy Reid gets Patrick Mahomes, he's considered a guy that can't win the big game.
Yep.
That was literally like 5-6 years ago. We were like, Andy Reid can't win the big game.
Yeah.
That's
why he left.
That's why he fired him in Philadelphia. Yeah, he was winning a lot because he won a lot of games there in Philly. Went to a lot of NFC title games, Super Bowl, but he couldn't win the big game. And Howie Roseman was like, God, I gotta get somebody that can win the big game. And he did. He went and got Doug Peterson, who is not as good of a coach as Andy Reid. Hell no. But he won the big game.
Yep.
I mean, so I think that's kind of what you get into. So if Caleb Williams is indeed that good, he'll make Matt Eberflus better. But we're talking about right now in terms of the situation that he's in. I will say this, though. I do believe skill talent-wise, this is what people are probably looking at.
The weapons.
Yes, the weapons. If you look at just weapons around him right now, around Caleb Williams, that's what everybody's saying. They're not talking about the coaching staff, which is really important. They're not talking about the O-line, which is really important. They're not really talking about the defense, which is really important. They're talking about the skill position guys, the weapons around him, as Patrick talked about. So in that, if you're looking at it from that perspective, basically from a fantasy perspective, that's what the world's like. From a fantasy perspective, you may have a point. There may be a case to be made that he has the best fantasy core skill positions around him than any other number one overall pick in the Super Bowl era, because he'll have DJ Moore, Keenan Allen. Those are both 1,000-yard receivers in their careers at one point. Romeo Dunze, drafted really, really high. All right. So as a drafted in the top 10 as a wide receiver. Cole Kmet, so maybe your tight end is not necessarily an elite prospect. And you got DeAndre Swift at running back. Now, this is interesting when you start breaking out down. If you start basically looking at all of the number one overall picks and the weapons they had around him. Now, there have been some number one overall picks with some really good weapons around him, but only 3 quarterbacks have basically had, and you go look at, had basically 4 players who were either 1,000-yard receivers, 1,000-yard rushers or made a Pro Bowl before or after the number one overall pick for that team, right? So we're talking about Pro Bowls before and after, so they got a really high ceiling, and or they rushed for 1,000 yards or received 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the criteria. If you're just looking at that as the criteria for the 28 number one overall picks at quarterback in NFL history, it's our Super Bowl era, I should say. Only 3 quarterbacks have had, like I said, 4 players who met that criteria that they were drafted on a team with in terms of the skill positions around him. Steve Bartkowski. Now, this could be before and after the number one overall pick, right? So sometimes these are after, sometimes these are before. Steve Bartkowski, 1975 Falcons. Michael Vick, 2001 Falcons. Falcons in here way too much. Joe Burrow, 2020 Bengals, is on this list as well. And those are the 3 that's on that. Those are the 3 quarterbacks that have at least 4 players that met that criteria. Pro Bowls before or after the number one overall pick, and 1,000 yards receiving or rushing before or after. And there's a case to be made that those situations, they didn't come into the teams with players who were close to their prime. That would be the argument for the Bears, is that the Bears have players right now at those skill positions that we talked about who are close to their prime right now. And you go look at, DJ Moore is a guy that's only 27 years old, had a career high 1,300 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns last year for the Bears. Keenan Allen, now he's getting a little up there in age. He's 32, but still had 108 catches, 1,200 yards last season for the Chargers. Romeo Dunze, number 2 or number 3 wide receiver prospect in that draft. So they can grow together. Cole Kmet had a career high 73 catches, 719 yards in his 4th season with the Bears. So he coming off his best season with the Bears. DeAndre Swift rushed for a career high 1,049 yards last season in Philadelphia. And so you could argue these guys are right now trending in the right direction. And that's why a lot of people are really high on Caleb Williams' situation, that it may be the best situation for any number one overall pick, but at quarterback. But the truth is, like I said, there's plenty of arguments for it, and there's a lot of arguments against it. The argument against it would be your O-line, your head coach, your coordinator. I would say I'd probably stop there, because I think the defense actually may be it may be an asset for him this year. So I would say the reasons to argue he is in the best situation: the defense was a top 20 defense, trending toward being a top 15 defense. Skill positions, you could make the argument their skill positions are as good, if not better, than the guys who were number one overall picks at quarterback before them. Like some people argue Peyton Manning in 1998. They had Marvin Harrison and Marshall Faulk, who are Hall of Famers. But remember, Marvin Harrison got better. He's basically like Romeo Dunze. He grew with Peyton.
Yeah.
So at the time he got Peyton, he wasn't the Marvin Harrison that we all know now. And then Marshall Faulk, remember, Marshall Faulk ended up getting traded to the Rams. That's where he blows up with the Great Show on Turf. It wasn't necessarily with the Colts. He was a good player there, but he's ended up in the perfect system with St. Louis. So some of these, you look at some of these situations and you go, oh, but they had Hall of Fame players. But some of those Hall of Fame players either kind of played for other teams, or they didn't start to reach their Hall of Fame worthy numbers until the number one pick got there. So some people believe that DJ Moore, and then having DeAndre Swift already there, and then obviously having Keenan Allen, that they have already established proven commodities. But like I said, it depends on how much you like Caleb Williams in the Bears situation. But like I said, I don't think it's the best situation ever for a number one overall pick. It is one of the best, though. It's one of the best. There's no doubt. Team won 7 games last year, got a decent defense, got weapons all around you for a number one overall pick, proven commodities on offense. But still, I worry about the O-line. I worry about the coaching period, because I don't trust Matt Eberflus. And those are the offensive system, getting back to what Patrick brought up about Shane Waldron. So you can make that argument, but I think it's a flawed one. It's a flawed argument to make. Okay, getting back to, I guess we'll skip the argument or the discussion about NFL players and NBA players transitioning to the other sport, do their skills translate? I'll save that for, we'll get to that later on the show. I promise we'll get it to you. Because I did some interesting deep dive, some rabbit holing about that particular topic, just the measurements of the players